Peter Frankel, welcome back to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's so good to connect with you once again.
Lovely to be here, fellows. Yep.
Yeah, it's great to have you back, Peter. Glutton for punishment, you are. But
Sure,
for us,
our last chat. So.
oh yeah, but for us, it's a blessing of riches because you wrote another article for us, which was great. We know we sort of grabbed one out of the book, but you extended and gave us a unique article, right, which we've just got up in the April magazine, and it's. You honed in on, we asked you about a few things, but you honed in on infidelity, which I think is one of the most, talk about last chance therapy, last chance, couples therapy. That's really when you're getting down to the difficult stages. Matt, you were particularly interested in some of this stuff,
Well,
for yourself.
Yeah, well, we will get there. We'll get there. There's some great practical things that I want Peter to touch on, but let's just dive in. So Peter, do you have can you set the scene for us, and let's put a couple in front of us who are dealing with infidelity, and what do we do?
Right. So there's a few things to know about infidelity. First is it's common to think that when there's been infidelity, that there must be something wrong with the marriage that the person is having the affair on, right? That's not necessarily the case. There's a fair percentage of couples in which a partner has an affair where the marital relationship is pretty good, actually. And the affair happens because of opportunity. You're traveling on business or what have you. There may be a desire to explore some other part of oneself that you feel you can't explore with your marital partner, even though there's a lot going on in that relationship that's pretty good. So it's important for therapists to realize that people have affairs for a lot of different reasons. Self-development, because the marriage is really lacking in some way, all sorts of reasons. So obviously we don't, in any kind of clinical work, want to reduce people to some kind of a caricature and script, really explore the individual reasons for why a person has an affair, and understand what's going on in the marriage and also what's going on in them that led them to do this. So, there's a few steps that I've outlined in that article, and also, of course, in the book, that are really helpful in a first session as part of setting the therapeutic frame. And, in our last podcast discussion, we talked about some of the general aspects of doing last chance couple therapy. So let me just review those because they are important in any kind of last chance scenario. The first is that we want to accept and validate both partners' ideas at the present moment about the future of the relationship. Right? The very term last chance couple means that there's at least one partner, sometimes both, who are thinking that if this therapy doesn't work, I really may want to end this relationship, whether it's a married relationship or not married. Right? So we're not there to save marriages. We're there to help partners clarify what it is they want. And as I mentioned in our first podcast, of course, as couple therapists, we come to the work with a bias towards helping couples thrive and do well and overcome problems and so forth. So we want to name that. At the same time, in other words, we're not neutral. Right. Unless we are designating ourselves as a divorce counselor, helping people move into divorce and do that as amicably as possible. We want to sort of hear each partner's ideas about their commitment to the future, and be able to say that, we want to have them hear each other and make it safe for both partners to talk about what it is that they want at this moment. And then we want to suggest that if it's possible, for the time being, let's suspend discussion about staying and going and enter into what I've called a liminal space, or a place in which you're not yet decided to break up, to end things, and you're not yet decided to go forward either. And that sets the stage for what I call experiments in possibility. In fact, non-binding experiments in possibility. And why that's so important, that non-binding word, is that sometimes the partner, or partners, but let's say one partner who's seriously thinking about leaving the relationship may be worried about engaging in a therapy process where things improve, because they're worried that if things improve, they'll have less of a strong argument for leaving. It often takes quite a bit of energy and reflection to get to the point of saying to your partner, I don't think I want to stay in this marriage. And now here you're coming to a therapist who promises some effective techniques and some new ideas. And part of them may be intrigued by that, and part of them may be afraid of that, because what if it gets better? What if it gets better and I still don't feel the love, or I still don't feel the trust, or whatever? Am I then going to be trapped? Am I going to have less of an argument for leaving? So we want to name that concern right away and say, look, we're going to engage in some experiments in possibility. We're going to try some techniques for decreasing conflict and increasing pleasure and connection, and work on resolving the difficult issues you've been struggling with. And we're going together to be looking at, the outcome of those experiments. And based on observable changes, then you'll be in a better place to decide whether to stay or go. Are you two willing to go on that journey, so to speak?
Yeah. I love this. I love this frame of let's create liminal, you said?
Liminal liminal space. That comes from anthropology. Victor Turner.
Right. It's a lovely term. Yeah.
We're going to just suspend time, almost like we're going to have this space where we're just going to experiment. No expectations. Let's just have this space to experiment. I think that's a great frame for the therapist to grab hold of and to experiment for themselves. Certainly when I've been doing couples therapy, I haven't really, my trajectory has been a lot more sort of linear. I haven't had this idea of, okay, stop, let's experiment, which is fantastic. So
yes, let's not sort of wallow in the past, nor get too stuck, too engaged with the future. It's not so much about just being in the now, but it's being in a space that's not overly affected. That has possibility, and that's exactly what you call it. I mean, and of course, I love the word possibility, the possibility space, and let's comment on that. But just adding into the things you said there, the comments you might make, it is that important aspect of the characterizations and the internalizations and the internal developments and changes, because I have had a couple of clients where actually the woman was independently having self-esteem issues, which of course is something that comes from the feminine sort of stereotype sort of negativities. And actually taking that stand of saying, well, I've had enough of this, this isn't right anymore, was actually a major part of self-strengthening. And it's exactly as you say, sort of like, oh God, if I go back to a relationship, am I giving in? Am I submitting? Am I now self-weakening? So it needs a really open space to be able to hold on to the strengths and the things you've gathered, and also when the person who has sort of really done the damage, for them to grasp onto their to find strengths in those actions of recovery and forgiveness and apology and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. Well, you wanted to talk today about cases, so
yeah,
what you just said, Richard, prompts me to think about a couple I worked with. And actually, I had they had allowed me to audio tape their sessions. They didn't want to be shown or themselves be the voices in my presentation. So I had a student transcribe things, change names and identifying information, and then had two of my former Masters in Mental Health Counselor students who happened to be professional actors do the role play. And so let me tell you just a little bit about this couple, because it's kind of fresh in mind. And it speaks to what you were just talking about, Richard. So this was a couple married about 15 years, white, cisgendered, upper middle class couple with a couple of kids. And, you know, they were kind of a classic, as we saw, one of my old supervisors used to say, refrigerator stove couple. You know, she was quite emotional and expressive and so forth, and he was quieter and kind of calmer. And initially, that was part of the attraction. And as you know, I've written about how the differences that partners experience early on often becomes a kind of unconscious emotional contract to regulate one another's emotions, or modulate, as I prefer the term. And so she was attracted to his calmness and quietness and steadiness, and he was enlivened by her emotionality and was learning a lot about emotions by being with her. And over the years, as happens sometimes, leads to distress, they become quite polarized. You know, kids come, he's working and often traveling. He was in a business that took him, you know, far abroad, actually, to your corners of the world often, and she would be at home with the kids. And while he was a good father, he'd come home and he wasn't really participating so much in housework and giving her a break. And she did a career change and was in her own individual therapy and starting to really think about the kind of person she wanted to be, and feeling increasingly trapped in this relationship. So when they contacted me, and she was the one that contacted me, she said she'd been trying to get him into therapy for 2 years and to talk about what their issues were. And he kept doing sort of, unfortunately, typical male, cisgendered, heterosexual male thing of, I don't want to talk about it, and withdrawing, leaving her feeling very alone. And also because he wasn't taking over things on the weekend or in the mornings to give her a little space to develop her new work trajectory, she felt resentful. And then he would travel away again and then come back. So finally, by the time she made contact with me, she was feeling like, at least for the time being, she does not want him. He was abroad on a trip, and she did not want him to return to the home. He was extremely upset by this in our first session. It's like, you know, you sort of ambushed me. And she said, I've been telling you for 2 years that I'm not happy, and I feel trapped, and I feel, you know, basically choked up with feeling unheard and like I can't really develop myself. So, you know, it looked like, if I didn't have the last chance couple therapy frame, you would think, okay, I'm going to help this couple get divorced because she's had it and he is very angry and not seeing her point of view. And I said to her, I said, look, the fact that you called me and we had a short conversation and I told you how I work and you read a little bit about it, suggests to me that you're coming to me to explore whether there's any possibility of changing things so that you feel differently. And she said, that's right. I said, well, then could we recast what you're saying as, for the time being, for the foreseeable future, I don't want to be living together. And she said, exactly, that's exactly it. That helped him feel like, okay, there's some hope. And it also meant that we could start to work on some experiments in possibility. And I said, look, you know, if you're coming to me for separation and divorce counseling, I can offer that to you. So you have to let me know what it is you're up for here, and I will be of service. And she said, no, I do want to give it a try, or give it a go, as you gentlemen would say. And so that's where we started. And in that very first session, I taught them the communication skills that I'm so fond of, and, went through the problem patterns, escalation, withdrawal, invalidation, negative interpretations, taught them the speaker listener technique and so forth. They tried it out and they had a very good experience with it. So that was the first thing in terms of, again, observable changes that they could taste, that they could hear, that they could see. This is what couples in the last chance moment are coming for, or what they need. We can't just reassure them that somehow therapy is going to help them if we explore the problems. Just to your point, Richard, about time, one of the reframes they often use when people say, oh, well, you've had such a traumatic or terrible, difficult past, and yet they're behaving and interacting, thinking about each other the same ways they have for years. And I'll say, in a way, there is no past. There's one long present that stretches back weeks, months, and years. So it's kind of like Groundhog Day, like that old movie with Bill Murray, like every day waking up and it's the same day until you get it right, until you change something. So in order for us to bifurcate, to create an actual past and a present towards the future, I'm suggesting, if you're up for it, that we do some experiments in changing the ways you interact that will lead to changes in thought, feeling, and even physiological arousal with each other. And so it's a nice frame for saying, look, if we try some things, you might actually be able to put some of this in a past, because we're creating a past that's different from the present that then becomes the future, if that is a preferable one.
Just want to jump in, Peter, and go back, because there are a number of techniques and bits and pieces in there, and you're giving us this great frame. But I think these communication styles are really important. And just that one, the sort of speaker or listener style, can you just remind us of how that works, sort of, and enables them? And so just give that little practical aspect, because there's far too much in there to do. But that one I think is really important.
It is important. And, just a shout out to one of your countrymen, Kim Halford. Are you familiar with Kim?
Yeah. We know of, yeah.
Yeah, well, Kim is someone I've contributed a chapter for, a book that he did. He's one of the premier people in the world, along with Howard Markman and Scott Stanley, who I studied with directly on these skills. And Kim is a big advocate and very eloquent writer about relationship education. And so these techniques Kim is very familiar with. And basically what it comes down to is, first of all, teaching couples psychoeducationally what 50 years of research with Gottman and Halford and Markman and Kurt Hallweg in Germany and Guy Budman in Switzerland. Many, many people have contributed to this research base. What it has taught us about what distinguishes happy couples from unhappy couples at any point in time, cross-sectional study, and also longitudinal studies with newlyweds, where even though they're happy and they're newlyweds, a significant proportion of them are already interacting in these problematic ways. And we find that, 6 years later, even a year and a half later, you start to see that the couples interacting in the ways that I'm going to describe are starting to not do so well, because these problematic patterns start to kind of grind away at all the positive things, the love, the sex. But to be very brief with this, there's escalation, one partner saying something with negative affect, meaning specifically criticism, contempt, and defensiveness. Not anger, by the way. One of Gottman's most interesting findings in a longitudinal study, looking at newlyweds, is that couples who are able to just talk about their anger without moving into criticism or contempt or defensiveness did quite well. He called this subgroup the volatile couples, and they were doing quite well. And that makes sense, because look, we all get angry, frustrated, peeved, have a tiff with our partner. But if we can say, look, I'm really angry with you, I'm feeling frustrated, rather than you're an idiot, how dare you, oh, you're so pathetic, contemptuous kind of affect. And so we can avoid all that and just speak in a somewhat modulated way, not flat. We're not training people to be, Rogerian therapists here. Like, you can say, hey, I'm really angry. And the other partner's like, oh, what did I do? Okay, well, blah, blah, blah. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Like, I was kind of angry at you though, too. This kind of thing can be fine. The problem is when people drift into criticism, putting down the partner's point of view, their feelings, even their whole character, like you're an idiot, you're a jerk, you're so cold, you're a slob. Contempt, which is verbal and nonverbal expressions of disgust and dismay and revulsion, even. One of my favorite examples of this from years ago with a couple. I'm in New York City, and there are a lot of people making a lot of money. So this guy, who actually came from a lot of money, his father had not been working, his brothers didn't work, but he wanted to be in the workforce. He came from a lot of money. He's working on Wall Street, making $350K a year in the 90s. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good salary. Not for his wife. His wife turned to him on the couch. I'll never forget this. She looked at him with a sneer and said, "You're not a man, you're a boy. I've talked to the wives of your colleagues, and your colleagues are all making $1 million plus, some much more. So you're pathetic." And he's like, but at least I'm like, and both genders can do contempt, believe me. So that's just one example. So this kind of disgust, very toxic, as you can imagine. And defensiveness. Your partner says, hey, I thought you were going to throw out the garbage. Reasonable. And the other's like, who the hell do you think you are asking me when I make all the money to bring all the tofu home, or the meat, or what have you, right? So that's escalation. Very quickly, withdrawal. Partner gives verbal or nonverbal signals that they're pulling out of the conversation. Deep sigh, shaking the head down. And in the research, we code all this stuff, right? We have couples talk about a hot topic, videotape it, code the behavior. So many studies doing this kind of thing, including studies I did. And, so the partner withdraws, and of course, you know that what happens next is the other person pursues. So we have that classic withdrawer pursuer pattern. Invalidation comes in two forms, an active form and a more passive form. So the active form is essentially criticism. I'm kind of blending here research from two labs, Gottman's and Markman and Stanley's. So invalidation, the active form is, that's a dumb idea. Or what are you getting so sensitive about? Like, what are you always so sensitive? The passive form is a kind of under response to a partner's upset. An under response to what Gottman would now call a partner's bid for attention. Hey, honey, I read something interesting about in the news, or, oh, I had such a tough day at work. And rather than saying, oh, really? Yeah, I'd love to hear about it. Or, you know what? I definitely want to hear about that. I just got to finish up this email. Instead, it's like, oh, really? Yeah. Hey, what are we having for dinner? Kind of like a non-response, or even like a sort of attempt to be helpful, but it's not really helpful. Like, oh, honey, not your boss again. You'll be okay. I know you can handle it. Just fuck her up and you'll be fine. I wanted to talk to you. Could you listen to my feelings a little bit? Yeah. The fourth major problem pattern is called negative interpretations. This is where we develop a theory of malintent about our partner's behavior. You're saying that because clearly you have no respect for me. Otherwise, how could you say something like that? You obviously don't love me. What do you mean? Well, we've had 3 dinner dates and you come late to each one. So obviously you don't want to go on dinner dates with me. So don't lie. Just tell me the truth. You're trying to control me. You don't love me. You don't respect me. You're obviously not committed. All these kind of negative attributions, as Thomas Bradbury and his colleagues would say. Tom Bradbury at UCLA has done a lot of the research on these negative attributions. So these are the 4 biggies. I just had a session about this morning, actually. And I said to to the couples, do any of these sound familiar? And they say they all sound familiar. And then we're in a position to be reassuring and say, well, look, you're in good company. These problems visit upon many couples, happy and unhappy. And the good news, it's just behavior. You don't have to get into hypotheses about deep, psychoanalytic stuff. It's behavior, and I can teach you, and I will teach you, a communication skill and some others to help. So I know we've got a lot of other things to talk about. So briefly, the first thing we want to do is teach partners how to physiologically modulate themselves, because we know from research and experience that when we even anticipate a difficult conversation with our partner, certainly when we're in one, the sympathetic fight or flight part of the nervous system gets activated, cortisol, adrenaline, heart rate goes up, just like we're facing any other kind of danger. And it's a terrible time to try to talk about issues, about sensitive feelings and so forth, right? Because we're going to attack or we're going to withdraw. So we want to teach couples these timeout or stop action rule. If they sense they're getting into an escalation, call a timeout, stop action. I encourage couples to come up with their own, nifty name for it in their own language. If English is a second language, whatever, a safety word essentially. And the point is they're going to team up against these pernicious patterns that visit lots of couples. And so one partner says, I think we need a timeout or red balloon or whatever they're going to call it. The other partner has to agree. But then the person who calls the timeout has to lead the way in scheduling a time to come back to the conversation. And that can be in a few minutes after they do some mindful breathing. I teach people to do some mindful breathing. I even teach people a little Qigong. Qigong is an ancient Chinese internal martial art that I've been studying for 30 years. Very useful. And also has research behind it, just like mindful breathing does, in terms of decreasing. So there's the timeout, and then they come back using the skills. If it's an inopportune to talk, within 24 hours. The speaker listener, very briefly, one partner speaks, one partner is in the speaker role at any one moment, the other is the listener. Speaker speaks for 10 to 15 seconds, keeping it brief. Using I statements, not you think and you feel, but I think, I feel, I remember. The other partner repeats back what they heard. That kind of thing. And an XYZ statement, blah, blah, blah. So those are the techniques. But the psychoeducational stuff that I just went through about the problem patterns, very important. And if we don't, I'll just say to all the therapists out there, if you don't lead in 15 minutes, you can do this, lead the couple through, teach the couple those problem patterns. You're not providing them, first of all, a way to diffuse or see through the gray gauze of conflict. Because when people start fighting, they get into a state and it just seems like one big mess. And when we can name the particular patterns, they can catch them earlier. They can even anticipate that they're about to say something critical or contemptuous and zip it, as we say, and do something different, right? It also builds motivation for the skill, which initially feels a little hokey and artificial, but works. And if people practice it, they get better at it. So there's a lot more we could say about the technique.
No, that's brilliant. And it's something very concrete. I mean, these are behaviors that they stand out, they're obvious. We can identify them quickly. We can do something very pragmatic at the front end of therapy. And I think it brings a lot of hope too. But you do, like you just said before, you do have to take control of the session, because it's just too easy, especially for a couple that are in a really hot state. They just can take over the whole session, right? And you could just sit there and they're just going at it for 50 minutes. But taking hold of
and then they turn to you and say, "Why are we paying you for this, Frankel?"
Yeah, exactly. Right.
It's true.
Yeah. I mean, I do remember a couple where they were very sporting, and I actually had a red card and a yellow card, and so in that sense of the timeout thing, I got involved. It became a try thing where they did it with each other, but then I also did it as a therapist, and we'd all sit back and so and that communication things where not only the speaker and the listener but then repeating back what they say just to well, kind of to prove it, but also to activate it. And I find it quite interesting how many people who do that sort of repeating back after a very short period of time saying, "Oh, is that what? I didn't know that's what you were saying." And this is stuff they've been saying for years and years and years. So simple techniques, and as you say, they might seem a little clunky and forced, but actually it is just literalizing and directing what is supposed to be a natural behavior. So and these argument states that we get into moves them into not unnatural but dysfunctional, non-effective behaviors.
Right. Natural, unfortunately dysfunctional behavior, but quite natural.
Yeah.
So it does feel unnatural at first, but you're absolutely right that, if you're really listening to a friend or a colleague and you respect them, and you probably do something like what we end up teaching couples, which is, tell me all about that. That's interesting. Really? That's what happened? Yeah. Like, we're giving each other space. But when it comes to our, marriages or equivalent relationships, we often get very defensive, and, the alarm bells go off and so forth. So we have to prepare people for the fact that it will feel a bit awkward, but they're more willing to try it out if they know what they're trying to avoid. That's the key. Yeah. And I emphasize this enough because I've seen senior colleagues sometimes present similar kind of work where they don't do the prelude with all the problem patterns, and then they're jumping in on video telling the couple, "Oh, you're escalating now," and they're like, "What? Oh, yeah, escalation is when you."
Oh, and then they have to post explain.
Literally on one tape I watched years ago, a couple turned to the therapist and said, "Now we're getting pissed off at you because you keep interrupting us."
Yeah, and doing an enactment. But now we've done beautifully. We've given them these frameworks, given them sets of contexts, reminded them effective ways of listening and understanding each other, and then we ramp the whole situation up into something even more tense when it is infidelity.
Right.
When there's not just a difficulty between the two, but a wrong. I'm a
violation of safety of values.
A violation of safety. Yeah, please, Peter. What do we do now? We've got them in this state, but it's infidelity. Wow.
Right. So as you remember from our first talk, I think about 4 types of last chance couples: the high conflict, which we kind of were just talking about. Then couples in which one partner, typically one, sometimes both, but one has violated the values or safety and expectations of the other. And infidelity is the one we're going to talk about tonight, but others include intimidation, aggression, violence.
It's all bad, yes.
Also, and then also persistent abuse or overuse of substances, alcohol and other substances. All of those can leave the other partner feeling both that their expectations about reliability and consistency and responsibility of their partner have been violated. They can feel unsafe, literally, of course, with violence, but also with affairs, worrying about getting a sexually transmitted disease that comes up with affairs. So let me go through kind of the frame particular to working with infidelity. After you've sort of laid out that basic frame, that always has to be there. We're going to do experiments of possibility. We're not deciding in this session whether you're going to stay together or not. We're going to try to see what can happen around this revelation. And so all of these are elements. They're not steps, because in fact, first of all of them, in my experience, have to be named at least in a first session as part of helping the couple see that you have some understanding of these issues, addressing their concerns about whether you do have some understanding, like your credibility, your knowledge base. And then from there, we're going to decide, session by session, what we're going to focus on. So don't take these as steps, but rather elements, although the first one is usually the first step, and that's discussing the story of how the affair was revealed. And these days, affairs are generally revealed, in my experience, through people seeing something on the phone, a text message, social media, or maybe they were going through credit card expenses and they saw some unexplained charges for travel or gifts, jewelry. What did you buy that necklace for? Or this nice handbag, and what have you. Or sometimes, as in the case that I wrote up for you, which is not in the book, it's special for Science of Psychotherapy, where the person who was the affair partner is angry with the person they were having the affair with and calls the affair on partner. In other words, the affair partner gets angry with the person they were having an affair with, and they call the wife or the husband to report it. And that's what happened in that case. So those are typical ways. I generally don't have this happen too often anymore, where a couple starts therapy with me because things aren't so great in the relationship, and then in an individual session, they reveal that there's an affair going on. If the affair is over, I don't require them to disclose it. I don't. If the affair is ongoing, I will say, look, in order for us to really work on your marriage, I'm going to ask you to, at the very least, take a vacation from that relationship, because your energy is going to be diverted. And I trust when they say they're going to do it, that they did it. I don't have a private eye working with me, but I assume that they are getting my point and that they're committed to working with me on things. So again, in most cases, it's the presenting problem that has now led to a question about the future of the marriage. So talking about how the affair was revealed, and typically the original moment will be like, the affairing partner saying, no, that's not happening, you're making that up, or where'd you get that, or whatever. Sometimes they come clean about it right away, but oftentimes there's like, no, that didn't happen. No. And then finally the evidence is too overwhelming and they have to acknowledge it. One of the things that's most puzzling to the affairing partner is that the affaired on partner wants more details, often quite excruciating level of detail, about each interlude, each visit, each sexual experience, each dinner that was had. They want, and the affairing partner is like, why do you want to hear more of this? Is that going to make you more upset? So to explain this, we need to introduce the trauma frame, because in every case that I've ever seen over 30 years, at some level, sometimes severe and sometimes at least mild, the affair on partner is literally traumatized. And we use that term all the time to talk about feeling upset, but this is like real trauma where there are intrusions and nightmares and triggers and hypervigilance and numbing on the other side, all the things we associate with any kind of trauma. And of course, the thing that's special about this one is that the person who did the thing that traumatized the other is the partner. So the person, let's say something awful had happened to you in the street or what have you, the person you would go to for soothing and holding and all of that and safety is the person who perpetrated the events that led to the trauma. It puts the affair on partner in a terrible emotional bind. So one of the things that is very typical with any kind of trauma, not always happens, but certainly happens a lot, is that the traumatized person and their brain is trying to wrap their head, literally their brain, around the shattered expectations about the new information. And, one of the ways that humans make sense of things is gathering more information. So when there's a trauma like this, they want more information. So I suggest that, at least for the time being, the affair on partner should have, if they want it, access to computer, phone, anything, that the other person has to turn over all their formerly semi or totally private stuff. And sometimes they balk at that. And I explain, look, we're not going to be able to move forward, I think, because unless you allow this, because A, they're trying to deal with the trauma, and B, they may literally say, look, I need to know more about what happened here because I want to make a decision about whether I want to stay with you they have a right to hear those things. So while I'm saying this, I'm realizing this is an instance, all three of these types of value violating behaviors, affairs and violence and substance overuse, they do bring a moral frame to our work. And one of the people who's written most eloquently about this is Bill Doherty, my wonderful colleague at University of Minnesota. And I'm going to plug his book because it's so wonderful. Bill Doherty's book, The Ethical Lives of Clients, Transcending Self-Interest in Psychotherapy. This is a book that at least all my students going forward are going to read, and every student of psychotherapy should read, because this field, as you know, we could have a whole nother podcast on how our field has traditionally avoided, evaded moral discourse and discussions. But as Virginia Golder, one of my other mentors and idols in the field, and whose work on domestic violence, interpersonal violence, I base my work on, brought also this concern that when we're working with couples where there's been violence, we have to address what happened from a moral point of view. Ethical point of view. It was wrong to beat your spouse, to intimidate them, just as it was wrong to cheat on your partner when there were other things you could do if you were unhappy with the relationship, or you had individual needs that you needed to, get some succorance for, or what have you. So there is that moral frame, and yet you notice, except for one little slip there, I don't think about the affaring partner as a cheater. I don't think that's helpful therapeutically. I think it's name calling, and it's not language that is useful for a therapist. So that's why, because you asked me before we started, Richard, how I come to those terms. To me, it's the most direct, neutral way of talking about it. The affaring partner and the affared on partner.
The severe attachment breach is not unlike a young child being abused by a parent, where the child is, the attachment breach happens in such a severe way. The child is, would normally be looking to the parent for comfort, and the parent is the abuser. And it sounds very similar here.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that I worked for 12 years on a project developing a family-based approach to incest. You can just imagine how.
And so these things tie in, don't they, Peter? So of course the adult attachment style, and suddenly it's sort of being betrayed again if you've actually had those double things. So this is where you're also talking about the individual influence. So the affared on partner, now they might be securely attached and traumatized and upset by the experience, but they might be insecurely attached from youth, and so they're getting a double whammy. So there's a very individual approach.
Yeah, and if we want to make it even more complex, the affaring partner may also have had insecure attach.
Well, I was thinking that before too, that they're out there trying to seek validation in a very dysfunctional way. Yeah.
Right. And the case, in fact, that I sent to you and that just got published on your wonderful site is about a guy who, had, I would say, a kind of avoidant attached style. His mother was, quite narcissistic and self-aggrandizing, and in fact demonstrated lying to her clients and sort of taught her sons to be deceptive if it served them. Father was rather passive and wasn't protecting the sons from what was going on with the mom. And this guy, not to get into the case yet, but this guy also reached puberty quite late and was often teased for looking immature. And sometimes boys would tease him and say, "You look like a girl," and he couldn't get dates. And so then he ends up having affairs with younger women as a way to bolster his sense of sexual prowess, and also almost like as a kind of problematic corrective emotional experience. So as a middle-aged man, having sex with quite younger women who were his former high school students.
So that
not when he was teaching it, but later.
But of course, everyone can read that in the magazine, which is great, because it is extensively described. It's a beautiful article.
We also have to have the affaring partner take 100% responsibility for their behavior, even if they felt emotionally betrayed by their partner. And Esther Perel, my dear colleague, has talked about that as a very important thing, as has my other dear colleague, Michelle Shankman, who's written eloquently about affairs, that the person who's been affared on sometimes has engaged in a kind of betrayal as well of the relationship. No, they haven't had an affair, but they may have really been ignoring and rejecting the partner for years. And, no, that's not an explanation. I mean, an excuse for the other partner to then have an affair. But we do have to understand that betrayal is not as simple as like there's a perpetrator and a victim and this old sort of Wild West kind of caricature narrative of things. So, nevertheless, the affaring partner has to take responsibility for acting upon whatever sadnesses, frustrations, loneliness, curiosity, need for self-development they had by having a secret affair.
Yeah, this was the action I took. This was the choice I made, regardless of its understandability or just narcissism, but just I did do this.
Irrespective of what you did to me or didn't give to me, I made a choice and I take responsibility for that. If we don't do that bit in the first session, likely that the other partner won't come back, the affair on partner. Why? Because one of the other things we need to do, of course, over a period of sessions is develop a psychological explanation for why the affaring partner did have the affair. And if we haven't been clear from the outset that the affaring partner's explanations are not excuses, we're going to lose the affair on partner. We're going to make her feel like, well, we're giving him a psycho card out. Like, yes, oh, I was troubled. Oh, I was lonely. Oh, you were so rough on me. Oh, etc. We can understand. We have to understand all that stuff. And yet there were other things they could have done. They could have said, I am desperate. I'll even tell you, there's someone flirting with me and I'm kind of interested. So we got to work on this relationship, or I can't guarantee what's coming next with me. I don't feel happy. Like, they could do that. A lot of things they could do. So we have to say all that in order to set the stage for what will be both individual sessions as well as joint sessions in explaining why they did. And with this gentleman that I wrote about, there were multiple levels. We had a whole chart, like we're 12 things that converge on this. As Freud said long ago, problem behavior is multi-determined. And in this case, that's usually true. So we also have to help the affair partner with their trauma. And there's two things with that. Very briefly, the affaring partner needs to make a daily apology, do an apology ritual, first thing in the morning, preferable, almost prophylactically, because the affair on partner is almost inevitably going to be visited by intrusions, flashbacks, hypervigilance, bad feelings, and so forth. So in the morning, the affaring partner is to say something to the effect of, Laura, Jim, whoever, I just want to say again that I'm very sorry for having done the affair. And I'm also sorry for the thoughts and feelings and flashbacks and stuff that you are likely to have because you've been having them across the day. You may be having those thoughts and feelings, and I want to apologize in advance for that and say again that I'm sorry. We only do this apology ritual. I present it as a technique in the first session and ask the affair on partner if they want that. They always like the idea. Sometimes they think, it seems a little hokey. I don't know if it's going to help. And then they experience it and they want it. And if the affaring partner fails to give it to them someday in the week between sessions, they'll report that.
But it has to be authentic though, right? It has to be authentic though.
It has to be authentic. Yeah, it can't be like, baby, I'm really sorry. But yeah, I'm checking out some. I still got the dating app. I'm checking. Like, no, it can't be. It has to be. Look, I really am sorry. I know how I've hurt you, and I know that going across the day, you may experience some of these thoughts and feelings again, and I really apologize for that. So we have them try it in the session.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the behavioural research ages ago talking about trust. I can't remember where I read it now. It's quite a long time ago, but it only takes one action to disturb trust. But in this research, it took between 7 and 10 positive actions in order to rebuild. It wasn't just one for one. And I can also imagine, Matt, that that actually the more you do it, the more likelihood you're going to get into it. So you might be a bit insincere, a bit hokey about it at first, but then as you go along, and but the fourth or fifth time you say it, you go, "No, I really am sorry." You know, you sort of convincing yourself a bit too is possible. And as always with these comments, Peter, we've got to accentuate that there are still all those individual responses. And they change.
Every behavior takes some getting used to. Even apology, eager listener, it doesn't matter. So remember, we're letting people know that at the beginning of our work together that we're an action-oriented approach, action insight, and the things that we suggest that they do will inevitably feel, at the very least, artificial, maybe even emotionally irrational, because you have such negative feelings, because you're so mistrusting of him or her who had the affair. Like, how can you even listen to an apology? But then, lo and behold, it starts to work its magic in a way. Just a couple more points, and then we can talk in any way you want to go. But even with this apology, I mean, part of the reason for this is once an affair is disclosed, the affaring partner typically kind of just wants to move on. Okay, now let's move on. I don't want to leave. I want to make things better. Meanwhile, the other person is vibrating, and they can't move on. So at least for a few seconds every day, the affaring partner has to revisit their guilt and show that they have remorse and share in the emotional burden of what they did. And that is relieving for the affair-on partner. But the affair-on partner often needs some other ways independently to manage their trauma. So very briefly, I have them do what I call paradoxical journaling with externalizing. Get a blank diary kind of book, a pen or a pencil that you use only for this purpose, and write for 10 minutes in the morning all of the thoughts, the intrusions, the feelings, the nightmares, the anger, the hurt. Close the book, put it away out of sight so it doesn't trigger you. And then when those thoughts and feelings come up during the day, you can say to them, almost like they're a being, I see that you're there and I know you're important, but I don't have time to do you justice now, because you are important. I'll see you in our evening writing time. And for 10 minutes in the evening, they write again. And the externalizing comes from Michael White and David Epstein, all that wonderful work, narrative therapy. Give it a name, even personify it, like the tormentor, the marital destroyer, not the name of your partner who did the affairing, but it's based on the impact that this is having on you. And you can address it that way. And it's this whole idea of creating an imaginative space between these thoughts and feelings and the core self. It's an idea that, in a way, internal family systems also uses a different language, Richard Swarsh and stuff. So that is actually very effective. And the paradoxical part is that after 2 weeks of this, the affair-on partner may open the journal in the mornings. I'm not having the thoughts and feelings. You still bring them forward. So this comes out of Viktor Frankl's work, what I affectionately and inaccurately call Great Uncle Vic, not related, who invented paradoxical intervention, right? This idea of bringing the symptoms on and even expanding them in some imaginative way as a way to change the power relationship between ourselves and our symptoms. So it's the basis of Ericksonian hypnotherapy and was the basis in some ways of strategic family therapy by Jay Haley and the original Milan group and so forth. So So it's quite helpful for the affair-on partner to do this, and gives them something to help them calm down. Of course, we teach the mindfulness stuff as a way of regulating emotion. And finally, they have to just limit times to talk about the affair. In principle, the affair-on partner has, full freedom to wake their partner up, call them at work, whatever, but it turns out not to serve them very well to do that over time. So it's best to set up a couple of times during the day that is devoted completely to further questions she or he may have, answers, and so forth, not at any moment. That helps to limit the trauma, both to the relationship and for the affair-on partner. They have to decide who to talk to about it. It's a lot of things that go into this treatment. They have to decide who to talk to. If they call a family member may, be very angry with their in-law now, their son or daughter-in-law, and also with their own child. So like, how can you stay with him? How can you stay with her? Like after that could lead to further difficulties down the road. So they have to decide, is there a sibling or a good friend who could really keep it secret and won't reject the other partner? And we have to have conversations about that, because the affair-on partner needs someone else to talk to. They can't only rely on the partner who did the affair. And finally, is formulating a plan to end contact with the affair partner, and also change affair facilitating behavior, right? So if there was a lot of drinking involved and late nights, business meetings and stuff, maybe those have to end. They probably do. Business travel, certainly with the affair partner, has to end. I mean, there's all sorts of examples I could give you of changes that people had to make that were kind of difficult.
But you've got to make it's difficult. It's setting a priority, and I think in a relationship, it's difficult, and it changes over time. I'm in a second marriage, which kind of means I'm older and I've done things, but fundamentally, I just keep getting back to the point of saying, I want to be with this woman, and whatever it is that's bothering me at the moment is not important enough. And that's a difficult thing when you're younger and you're perhaps in the prime of mid-30s, early 40s, in the prime of your career, and those business trips. That decision is a big decision as to how important your relationship is, how important your children are. As you're saying, sometimes the children are the ones that are putting up additional stick into the game. So there's a lot to work on. I really appreciate, Peter. And as a therapist, I'm reminded of that old thing of the carnival act with the sticks with the plates on the top, and you spin the plates. You got to. So there's a lot of work to keep spinning, which clients obviously can't do on their own. And that's of course why they're in trouble.
Right, and we have to provide them a map that's coherent, so that they feel like, okay, this therapist really understands what we're going through and has a plan. Not going to be helpful. Not helpful is a therapist who comes in and hasn't read the literature on affairs and treatment and just thinks it's going to be same as any old couple therapy where each partner has their point of view. That's a disaster.
So it's the plan and the tools, because the journaling that you talk about, and I know from my own experience, it can be incredibly powerful. I remember having a middle-aged woman as a client. She felt like she was falling in love with a younger guy. He was flirting with her. She came to me. She wanted help because she didn't want to go in that direction. She was an author. And so we used that skill, and she sort of wrote the story of what would happen if she continued on in this direction with this younger guy, and it became a horror story, and that was the thing that then really turned her around, her own ability to actually get stuff down on paper. So
very helpful. That's right. It makes it a bit more real. gets it out of the head. This
Yeah,
kind of
makes it a bit
fuzzy-
more, objective rather than, that subjective where you can, and harder to avoid too, I suppose, Peter and Matt, with that.
It also, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rich.
No. That's all I was saying. Yeah.
As you were talking about it, Matthew, it reminded me, we're not talking tonight about so much about working with drug and alcohol overuse, but one of the techniques that they use in like the AA program, which I think is a fantastic program. I've worked with quite a number of people in recovery, and I hear all the slogans and the ideas, and they're brilliant. So one of them is the notion of playing the tape forward. Like, okay, you think you want to have a drink? You just came out of rehab. You want to go to the packy, as we call it in Boston. You want to go to the packy and get yourself 6-pack? All right, then. All right. So go ahead, buddy. You're going to have that beer in the parking lot, and then what's going to happen next? You know what's going to happen next? You have another beer and another beer. Then you're going to go to O'Reilly's bar and get shit-faced. Excuse my language, listeners who are sensitive, and fall down on the frickin' floor, and the cops are going to come, and you know how the Boston cops are. They're very tough. Joking
So
around.
it is.
Exactly.
Playing the tape forward is one of the best things for the alcoholic who is like, just need some relief right now. It's like, okay, and where's that going to take you?
Yeah.
Same thing with having an affair. Like, I just, if it's that impulsive, like I need some kind of gratification. I need some validation. I need some sex. And I need it from a human being. I can't just like go online. I got to get somebody. Well, okay. Let's think about that. Where's that going to take you?
Consequence thinking, which is what we talk to kids about when they're 5. If you have that extra lolly, and so on and so forth. So there's and just sort of hearing in there, there's potentially some indications that impulsiveness of arrested development through to prior trauma. So there's all kinds of potentially useful things that individual psychotherapy can do, and that just takes us back to what you say. There's couple sessions, but then there's also individual sessions where you're helping people work through the things that put them into the frame where doing these actions seem to be like an okay idea, despite the fact that they just had red marks and crosses and don't do this all over them, yet we still do it.
Yeah.
And I look back on my life, I've done those things, and I learned a lot from them. Didn't create too much disaster. Mostly just hurt myself in my problems, but that's where you learn if you learn as different from succumb and be defeated by, and that's why we need the therapist.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just on this point of like that we talked about at the beginning, and you kind of alluded to now, is that some people have affairs because of deep longings, either for who they were in the recent or remote past, or what they've been missing for a long time in the relationship. And that's again part of what we need to honor in the narrative of the affaring partner, and to understand that, and then help them either get it from the relationship or figure out maybe this relationship isn't the one to get that with. I'm thinking of a couple I worked with a few years ago that's mentioned in my book, not in some detail actually, a fair amount of detail, where the woman had the affair. She was, in the finance business, doing extremely well, early 30s. Her husband also early 30s, had 2 young kids, and she was of South Asian descent and grew up in a mostly kind of white city, and felt as a woman of color sometimes exoticized, sometimes pushed away, like you're not white, some racism there. She's quite beautiful, and she became a teenager, got a lot of attention, and that was very gratifying, and it kind of helped her in those moments where she would feel the opposite, feel like, oh well, darker skin, so I'm not a regular American girl. So she had this kind of feeling about her own beauty and her being a person of color and the racism she was experiencing. So long and short of it, she meets a guy, a white Caucasian man from another city, and she's also like someone who was kind of in many ways very devoted, very bright student and a successful person, and also had a free, fun-loving side that she sort of connected more with her dad. Her mom was more the doctor, very professional, and her dad was more of an artistic guy, and she had both those things. And she climbed the ladder in the company quite quickly, was doing actually better than her husband, relatively speaking, had 2 little kids, and she ended up having a number of affairs with business colleagues on business trips. I won't get into all the details. People can read about that in the book. But basically, one of the things that was most helpful to her in terms of, and to the husband in terms of understanding like what happened here, was that in some ways she was having a hard time fully making the transition to being a mother and a married person. She longed for those times that were so gratifying and gave her so much at a time when she also experienced sometimes racist rejection. She was longing for that, and so she would get quite inebriated in some of these business meetings and become the life of the party again. And she was helpful to think about this from a life cycle adjustment point of view for her. Like, yeah, those days are kind of over in terms of like getting it in that intense way from other people. At the same time, her husband was kind of an uptight guy, so I had to really work with him to become looser and a little more carefree so that she could get more of that passionate stuff from him. Interestingly, she picks a guy, very handsome guy, but kind of uptight, so.
I feel that that's a really good point to be making. We're working with infidelity, working with couples. So there's a lot of work of established, there's a lot of stuff we don't know about being couples that we can know and which you've described in this podcast and of course in your book and in the articles. And then we still get to these, at all points, we've just got to continue to embrace the frailty of our, of bringing our capacities into their strengths. It's a journey and it's a pathway, and we are an interpersonal species, and we really need each other. And maybe it would be better if we still lived in villages and we had the fantastic Uncle Bert and Auntie Mary, but we don't. And so we have us, and we have wonderful people like you, Peter, who can help people come from these enormously confused and complex interactive states. And then 2 of them and bring them all together. And through these mechanisms, I hope the people that have been listening have been able, get their pens out, if not re-listen and get your pens out, and jotting down these things, these areas of focus, these natures, there's a 4 of this and a 5 of that. And then even more so that they go out and buy your book and at least come in and look at the magazine this month. There's a lot of material. And for members of the Science of Psychotherapy, we've got your material in there for them to access to.
Let me just remind people also, like, get the book, Last Chance Couple Therapy, Bringing Relationships Back from the Brink, Peter Frankel. You'll be doing yourself a favor. Everything is right there. So,
and I'm going to be getting those other ones that you've mentioned as well.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you for bringing those to our attention too, Peter.
Peter, wonderful as always. Thank you so much for connecting us and just sharing your wisdom once again, and just looking forward to continuing to hear more from you in the future.
Love it. Always a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you. Really a pleasure to speak with you.